Being here bright and early on a Thursday, that's almost like being here bright and early on a Monday. We're going to start the subcommittee meeting and the process for the DOT modernization bill that was introduced by Senator Grooms, as Senate Bill 831. This is going to be a There you go. There you go. All right. We are going to start the process, the subcommittee process for S831 DOT modernization bill introduced by Senator Grooms earlier in the week. As Senator Grooms mentioned yesterday during our full transportation committee meeting where we spoke with the commissioners of the department. This has the opportunity to be a very substantial bill within the state of South Carolina and moving us forward. I think I probably speak for everyone up here that there's probably nobody that, no district in this state that isn't touched by congestion or other types of infrastructure, road infrastructure problems, whether it's bridges, I know that Senator Rice deals with quite often, and just the makeup and the general condition of our roadways. So I look forward to the process. It's not my intention to rush this process. It's our intention to get input from multiple stakeholders. So this will not be the only meeting today. Today is really just an overview from the department on their view of the bill and what the bill does. And then we will schedule future meetings to discuss other components, and certainly not my intention today to take amendments to the bill. We'll have plenty of time to do that, and would encourage anybody on the committee to participate in that. Again, this is intended to be, unlike many subcommittees tend to be in the Senate. This is truly meant to be a working committee to go through the bill and make sure that we provide a quality product to the full committee, and then ultimately to the Senate, and then ultimately to our friends in the House. So any comments or questions from the committee members before we start? All right, great, thank you. Mr. Owens, how about give us a very brief introduction to this monstrous bill?
Thank you, Chairman. S831 by Senator Grooms establishes the Coordinating Council for Transportation and Mobility. It amends current sections to stipulate that the DOT itself, rather than the Commission, develop the statewide transportation plan, and removes the requirement that the Commission approve DOT's budget. This bill really broadens DOT's toolbox when it comes to funding, tolling. It expands provisions for public-private partnerships. As I say, expands provisions for tolling. It also significantly provides that the state waives its immunity and consents to suit in federal court relating to lawsuits arising out of DOT's assumption of responsibility for the NEPA process for certain environmental reviews. That is, the state would do those reviews with the goal of expediting those reviews rather than the feds in exchange for the state waiving its immunity and going straight to court should a suit arise. It also significantly provides for the transfer of local roads to local jurisdictions and establishes state and local funding options for the maintenance of such roads. It adds fees on new developments in order to mitigate congestion. The mitigation fee provides for a source of funding turnpikes. There are a number of cleanup and conforming provisions in the bill, but I think I've hit pretty much all the highlights, but with your permission, I believe we have DOT who would like to present some information.
Very good. All right, that's just a brief overview. Today we're going to hear from the department and Mr. Secretary himself, I believe. Good morning, sir.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of this committee. Thank you for the opportunity to come talk to y'all today about several of the provisions that are in this this bill. I know there were a lot of questions that were at points technical to my commissioners yesterday, so I'm happy at the end of my testimony to answer any of those that might be left over from yesterday's hearing. Do want to just say I'm just privileged and honored to work with a tremendous team. As y'all are all aware, we are looking at some pretty substantial winter weather impacts coming across the region, particularly in the upstate and towards the Charlotte area and the upper PD. Just so y'all know, our pre-treatment operations began this morning, and so you will see our crews out there painting the roads white with brine. We are pre-positioning contract resources not only to augment our pre-treatment, but we are also bringing in contract cut and toss teams to help expedite, and we're coordinating closely with the power company. So know that our folks are out there and ready to work, and we'll be beginning 24-hour operations tomorrow, and we'll be at it through the duration of the event. So I will get into the testimony from there, sir. This is something that I shared with the Transportation Committee last year during my State of DOT, and have been continuing to share both through the House process and the Senate process here. But I think it's important to kind of note that the last time the General Assembly had major debate and discussion about the state's transportation system was back in 2016 and 2017, where there were two sizable pieces of legislation that restructured and then increased the funding for the department. At the time, what I would say is the charge to the department was to fix it first, that we had, because of 30 years of accumulated deferred maintenance, our system was in desperate need of repair and bringing that together. And what I would say is that we have, and I'll share a little bit of the details, based on our 10-year plan, based on what we were asked to do back there 10 years ago, we have been delivering on what we were asked to deliver, and I'll go through some of those performance and those statistics from there. I think what we have seen, though, is that in the intervening 10 years since that period of time from the last major discussion, South Carolina has changed dramatically. We are a rapidly growing state. We have seen inflation just like all the rest of us in our own business, in your businesses, in our own communities, in our own household budgets, that have impacted our ability. And so the challenges that are facing the department are far different than the challenges that we saw back in 2016 and 2017. I want to take a moment just to kind of highlight what has been accomplished since the General Assembly took the last major action at that point in time. And we had implemented a 10-year plan. Basically, it was a requirement of the 2017 roads bill that we measure our performance, we look at the outcomes and the results we get out of it. And we really focused on four key areas. And I know y'all have seen this chart before, so I won't belabor it too long, but we focused on rural road safety and putting in projects where we can engineer and reduce our, at the time, worst in the nation rural road fatality rate. Because of the impact we've had, we just had one of the lowest years in over a decade in fatalities total on statewide roads. We have seen our rural road fatality rate. We are no longer the #1 rural road fatality rate state in the country. Now, we're number 2. It's not I'm going to get on a mountaintop and blast that there, but it's showing that the progress is being made. And those projects, when they're completed, we've seen a 30% reduction in fatalities occurring on those roadways. So we know it's working. Our pavements, we've gotten over 10,000 miles of paving projects underway across the state. Now, we have a 41,000-mile system, but we've gotten a quarter of the state highway system paved, but we know we've come a long way. Those dollars have been predominantly focused on the interstates and our primary networks because that's where 80% of the state's traffic is. We've seen those results. Back in 2016, we were at about 65% good on the interstates. We're at 80% good today, and with all the projects that we have going on, I anticipate we'll be at 90% very soon. We've seen a doubling of good pavements on our primary network as a result of that effort. But we know we still have a long ways to go to catch up from that 30 years of deferred maintenance. Bridges, obviously, huge issue, particularly in the upstate, in terms of keeping postings and closures off of our roads. We have gotten 464 bridges underway. The original goal was 465 bridges in our 10-year plan, so we've already exceeded that thanks to the one-time investments we've gotten from the General Assembly the past few years. We've increased our target to 550, but we still have a large bridge challenge in the state, not unlike the rest of the country. We've seen our closures starting to tick down as a result of all the efforts, but we still have 74 closed bridges in the state, 700 low-posted bridges that affect the movement of school buses, movement of trucks, movement of public safety vehicles that we know we've got to continue to tackle with an aging bridge inventory. And then last on interstates, we have been making significant progress. I-85 in Cherokee and Spartanburg counties is complete. I-85 through 85 in the Gateway interchange in Columbia or in Greenville is complete. We are working very aggressively right now on turning Malfunction Junction into Carolina Crossroads. We are well underway with 3 contracts on I-26 of widening between Columbia and Charleston. We just kicked off our largest contract, a $728 million widening contract at the Georgia border on I-95. So we have progress happening in every corner of South Carolina. I think I'd be remiss to say that there aren't challenges that have affected us as we move forward. That the first and foremost challenge that we have is on inflation. What we have seen is when the 2017 roads bill was passed, we could pay with 1 penny of the gas tax, which is about $35 to $40 million per year. We could pay for 114 miles of 2-lane paving with those dollars. Today, because of the inflation that we've seen, and that's nationally, road construction industry, the Federal Highway Administration has put that at about a 67% increase in prices. We have now seen our buying power diminish to 87 miles per penny of the gas tax. So we are pushing out fewer projects as a result. A few years ago, we could push out about 1,000 miles of paving projects per year. We're down to about 700 miles of paving projects per year. So we have definitely seen our buying power erode kind of post-pandemic with the inflation we saw, and then certainly inflation that spiked, that was kind of noted in yesterday's hearing that came out of the 2021 federal infrastructure bill. The second big challenge, and I kind of hit on this earlier, and I think every member of this committee is feeling it in some way or fashion in their districts, is South Carolina's accelerating growth rate. So in the 2010 and 2020 censuses, the state added about 500,000 people to the population. Obviously rapidly growing, but not one of the fastest growing states in the country. Historically, we're about the 10th fastest growing state in the country. The pandemic has certainly accelerated our growth rates as a state, and people have discovered what it's like to live in South Carolina. Great place to retire, great place to raise a family, great place to open a business. What we've seen is in basically that 6 years since the pandemic, we've almost added as many people as we had done in the prior 10 years. And the state's fiscal affairs, our Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Office is anticipating that we will have a population of 6.5 million people, if not more, by 2040. So we are going to continue to feel the pressure of growth. The issue of growth is more than just a transportation issue. It's a schools issue. It's a water sewer issue. But obviously, y'all get a lot of the complaints that come from that growth when people are complaining about traffic congestion, how that intersection used to take me 15 seconds to get through, and it's now taking me 15 minutes to get through. So we haven't been sitting on our hands, and I talked about this at the State of DOT last year. Our commission adopted our next legislatively mandated long-range plan. We call it Momentum 2050, and we really are trying to balance that dual issue that we're seeing across the state, that we are facing the need to continue to reinvest in the existing system as it is today. So we've got to continue to work on paving roads and rehabilitating pavements that have not been done. We've got to continue to invest in bridges that have been, dealing with an aging bridge inventory of 2,400 bridges that are 60 years or older, and that if we don't increase our investment, it'll be at 3,900 bridges in 10 years. We've got to continue to work on bringing down our too high fatality rate. We've got to continue to invest in our interstate system and add capacity there. The interstate system, when it was built in the 60s, was built for a state that has half as many people as it does today, and we have to be prepared for that. We have an increasing challenge of urban and rural mobility challenges in South Carolina. And obviously, for those of you who live in our metro areas, getting around town is much harder than it used to be. Getting from West Ashley to Daniel Island and Charleston, getting across Columbia, getting across from the BMW plant over to downtown Greenville. We know that it's a real challenge, but we also have a challenge in our rural areas where transportation is increasingly a lifeline for folks in terms of getting to jobs, getting to health care, getting to education. So we have to balance that issue. I think we have to look at different tools in the toolbox than we've looked before. And then fourth, our department is the Department of Transportation, but our mission is really focused on highways and transit. And there are other modes that impact the state. Obviously, State Ports Authority is a major driver of our state's economy, a major driver of the demands on our transportation system, similarly with our airports, with our railroads. And so we've got to work better at being better partners and better coordinators of our plans together. I would say it's a big plan, and it's been a plan that we are beginning to pivot as we wrap up our 10-year plan, and we'll begin programming from there. We've been doing a lot of steps within the department to work to make us more efficient, more streamlined. I'll share a few things that we've done, which will be published in the this month's State Register, is a 30% reduction of our regulations that we have on the books. This started back in the summer, and we're going to have that proposed, and obviously it'll be probably taken up by this committee and in the House as well. Because of the challenges with bridge designs, we've rehauled our bridge design standards so that we can hopefully push out more projects with lower impacts, with more of them getting out on the street, recognizing the challenge we have, particularly in our upstate counties. And then third, we are actively embracing new technology, several systems underway. One area I know I get a lot of feedback from the General Assembly is on encroachment permits, and we're implementing a new encroachment permit system. But one of the things I've insisted on that our team does is a full process review of how we make sure we can cut out any inefficiencies in that process. So we have been embracing making sure that we've got to do more with what we have and to become faster and more efficient. But what I would say is that if we're really looking at accelerating the department, there will likely need to be some statutory changes. And I think there are some things included in this bill that really do have the potential to help the department deliver more projects more quickly with changes in our toolbox. So as Mr. Owens kind of summarized in the opening, a number of provisions in the bill that are being—
Mr. Secretary,
yes, sir.
if I may interrupt, before you get going into the bill itself, can I ask a
Yes, sir.
quick question?
Yes, sir.
The inflation figure that you gave, it's about a 24% increase in, and I guess you gave the example of resurfacing, which resurfacing I wouldn't imagine involves much more than getting workers and materials on the ground. I mean, we're not talking about permitting, we're not talking about design, we're not talking about any of that. So how much of that 24% is materials versus how much of it is the labor for the contractor? How much has the contractor's work increased versus how much have the materials increased for that?
I would say there have been some elements that when we talk with the paving industry about what are their drivers, obviously we have a robust dialogue with them. Certainly the cost of aggregate has increased for them, so the rock that is in the asphalt base has certainly become a cost driver for them. The liquid piece of that obviously is driven by the price of oil, that goes up in there. But we've certainly heard labor and labor supply as a challenge, just like it's been for my own department, like it is for most everybody else. So that's been a challenge. I've heard challenges with the cost of hauling as being one of those areas. Again, I believe labor-driven, that people with CDLs are in high demand to be out there. So we've seen that. We've seen increases on the steel side as well as the concrete and cement side that goes into those inputs. So it's reflected, though. But what I would say is that it's not a story that's any different than what I hear from my colleagues in other states. Florida has a lot of challenges. We were having challenges with cement supply immediately after the pandemic. Florida was having challenges with aggregate. And so I would say this is not a unique to South Carolina issue, but an industry-wide challenge.
Is that 24% inflationary pressure higher, lower, the same when we get to new construction and design as opposed to just the paving that you've identified here?
Pavement side, I would say has, we kind of see those numbers there. The budget ask that the governor has put in has been heavily focused on our interstate system. So the large projects that we've had, when you take it all in total from what we thought they would cost in 2022, the last time there was kind of a major funding infusion from the General Assembly, it's about up 59%, which is very consistent with the Federal Highway Administration's Highway Cost Index, which is about 67% over the past 5 years.
And as I believe everybody was here yesterday, there's quite a few conversations yesterday about the number of contractors, the ability of those contractors to work, whether or not we have enough contractors. As you know, back in 2016, I remember that fight. And one of the arguments that were made for kind of easing those revenue increases into the system was so that we would have time to attract new and more contractors into the system. And I'm getting conflicting feedback from folks in my community whether or not that's happening or not. Are we seeing more contractors? Are we seeing more quality of contractors bidding on jobs, or is that number staying stagnant or shrinking?
So what I would say is what we've been seeing in bids right now, I've seen an increase in different firms entering our market. So obviously we see our in-state firms making their own business decisions about expanding, whether or not to add a plant or to enter a new market, and that's predominantly on the asphalt side. What we've seen on our bridge lettings right now, we are now seeing 8 to 10 bids per bridge letting. I would say that's a sign of a very competitive and healthy market, and we have seen market entries from North Carolina and Tennessee that are traditionally up more in those states coming in. Same thing on the very heavy civil side, the very large projects that we do. We have seen the 95 project is a new entry to our market. It was a firm that we started interacting with back with the Department of Commerce. It's out of there. So what I would say is in the Lake Marion Bridge, one of the partners on that project is a new entry to our market. So I participate actively with national industry and certainly want to make sure that folks know that South Carolina is open for business, and we work on building a consistent plan that if you come to South Carolina, there's another job for you to continue to work on. And so I feel like we see it. I think what we're challenged by is a labor challenge that we're all seeing in all of the trade type industries. And the Association of General Contractors has their Be Pro, Be Proud of trying to encourage young people to go into the trades industry. And that is, I think, a bigger challenge that we're seeing. But I would say we have seen competition increase over the past few months, and that to me is a sign that we are attracting folks in.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman, if we go back to the slide about the diminishing buying power, I was just curious, how is the gas tax trending right now? Is it making up for 50% of this inflationary problem, or is it going down? I don't know.
So our gas tax has been, when you exclude 2020, when we had a big fall off on gas tax collections because of the people basically staying at home during that period of time to do that. So we saw a pretty big drop at one point, and then it picked back up. What I would say is our gas tax collections have been hovering more growing very slowly is probably how I would say it. I would say it in the 1%, 2% range. When you look at inflation, obviously at one point we were up to 10% nationally, kind of CPI. We're at 3% now. It's below inflation. It's certainly below population growth. So fuel economy. EVs are affecting us, but fuel economy, I bought the same make and model of the car I had before, and I'm getting 2-3 miles per gallon more than what I was getting before. And so we're seeing that kind of the improvements in fuel economy are eating into that growth. And so because of our population growth, we haven't seen a decline like other states, but we're more holding our own and treading water as opposed to growing with the state's growth.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Powell, I appreciate everything y'all have done at DOT to try to help our constituents and improve the roads that we're on. I want to get a little bit in the weeds on the number of road miles we've got. You got 40,000 plus. Is that lane miles or is that two-lane road miles?
That is the center line. So it's the lane mile count. I don't have that in front of me right now. That obviously is bigger than that number, but 41,000 is the center line length.
So it's a two-way highway,
Yes, sir.
thereabouts.
Yes, sir.
And you say we've covered about 10,000 miles
Yes, sir.
in the last 10 years.
Last 8 years.
What is the life expectancy of the asphalt?
And it all depends on the conditions of it. I would say basically we're planning for a 15 to 20 year life cycle. We just changed the asphalt mix on the interstates to get rid of that popcorning that we were seeing, and we've put in a new asphalt that's basically used on the Autobahns in Germany. So we're hoping that the interstates will hold up longer. It's costing us more, but should last longer as that. But yeah, it certainly is about a 15 to 20 year lifespan on asphalt.
But you're saying it's taken 10 years to get a quarter
Yes, sir.
done. So if we project that forward with no inflation cost, but you're saying now you're down, instead of being at 100%, you're at 70% on the coverage. But you're going to get to about half the lane miles that need to be, or the highway miles that need to be covered in a 20-year period, which means half are not. What is your solution to how we can move that quicker?
I think, certainly additional funding for more pavement. Obviously, we would have to work with the industry to make sure that they ramp up accordingly to do that. I think, one of the considerations in this piece of legislation is a voluntary reduction in the state highway system and trying to provide some incentives for local governments to do so. Certainly, we're trying to provide a product that across the state that we're trying to form uniform and consistency on. So there is that. I don't think we can talk about a mandatory devolution to the local governments because we have certainly local governments that have robust public works departments that have the same equipment as our personnel do, but we have counties in the state with one backhoe for 500 square mile county. They know that they just won't do that. But reducing the inventory certainly would help us focus our resources on the highest volume, highest utilization statewide type routes.
But have you looked at that as far as a percentage? I mean, are you talking about 20% of your inventory? You're talking about 5% of your inventory?
So we have done an analysis. I'm happy to provide it to the committee. I would say that we had determined that we could probably, if locals were willing to accept it, and that's an if, we could reduce the inventory by probably 20,000 miles. That would be what we would consider as truly local roads in other states. Just to put it in context, I brought up the 41,000 mile system size. Georgia's got about a 17,000 mile system with twice the population. Florida has a 12,000 mile system, state highway system, with basically 5 times our population.
So you're saying basically 50% of the roads. What are you going to do with the revenue?
I would say, I think you're going to have, again, any movement of revenue out of the department ultimately diminishes what we do. I think there has to be a consideration of what tools may be available to the local governments for their revenue side. And there's some consideration in the legislation that's been introduced of, if a county were to take on its what we would call those roads that have been identified by the department, you could remove the state road requirement on the CTCs, which would help. There may be some other considerations of other tools that can help them do that. I have proposed in the budget that is now in the House right now a buyback program of $25 million as an upfront payment to local government. So I think it has to be looked at kind of holistically, but recognizing that We started adding those local roads in the 1940s, so we're dealing with an 80-plus year challenge of saying the state was going to maintain roads that would oftentimes be roads, local government roads in other states.
If you were if you were managing that local government, whatever it is, city, county, whatever, and you've got a proposal on the buyback, would you buy it back?
I think it'd have to be the community that, obviously I'd been in local government. It'd have to be the community I'm in and what they were wanting. I mean, one community I worked in, they took a lot of interest in high standard of road maintenance and road condition, but also wanted to do things that speed humps and speed limit reductions that the DOT may not necessarily approve, and so they were maybe more interested in doing that there. I've been in other local governments that had zero interest regardless of their capability to maintain those roads. So
I mean, it would require the finances
I believe
to come
yes, sir.
back with them. So thank you.
Money would have to be part of the equation.
Senator from Richland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to you, Mr. Secretary. I want to go back to this inflation issue and how that has led to atrophy or a decline in our buying power, if you will. You mentioned something about the infrastructure bill and how that led to inflation, and the corollary was, again, this atrophy or this decline in our buying power. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And here's why. Historically, when you hear about money coming in from Washington, and specifically with respect to infrastructure, that is typically welcome news. And so I guess for me, going forward, it'd be nice to know if infrastructure bills from Washington or federal dollars that are coming in for infrastructure, whether or not that is a good thing or perhaps the devil's in the details. I know oftentimes we talk about how can we improve our roads. We look at a local sales tax, for instance, or we say we want more money from the General Assembly. And then we also, seek federal intervention or assistance. So maybe talk a little bit about the limitations, of federal assistance, or maybe is there something that perhaps we are missing or could be overlooking when we're talking about help from the federal government?
So the federal infrastructure bill, when it was passed in 2021, basically we were getting about $700 million per year that goes into our budget for formula funds that we program to projects. The infrastructure bill had about a 30% increase in that, so we went up closer to about $1 billion kind of annual program dollars. Certainly was welcome news at the time, and we had amended our 10-year plan to incorporate those dollars and to try to do more, particularly on our interstates, particularly on our bridges. It came at the same time as the overall inflation spike that we were seeing nationwide. So we saw that while that revenue was welcome, what we ended up seeing was that in a lot of respects, all it was doing was keeping us up with that inflation that had occurred. When you look at federal funds in general, federal funds do come with the highest amount of strings attached to them. So you have to we make a conscious decision about where we program our projects with our federal funds. We make a very conscious decision to use state dollars for our paving projects. And the reason why we do that is when we had federal funds going on, they were basically asking us for full and complete design plans on something that you could do on a much simpler strip map that a contractor can perform the job without needing a certified set of PE stamped plans to make that happen. So where we focus our federal dollars are on projects like our interstates and bridges where they have a major say anyways on what we are doing, and more permitting requirements and that. So we focus it there, or it's on where they have specific focus on. So we have to allocate money to our metropolitan planning organizations for them to program projects. We have to put money towards safety projects, and so we follow their rules and restrictions, and we work hard to try to make sure that they work for South Carolina, but it comes with the highest set of requirements with it. One thing I will share is that the federal infrastructure bill expires in September of this year. We have been kind of based on our discussions at the national level and with that, we do not expect growth in the federal program like we had back in 2021. And I would say we probably need to be braced for the potential of a cut. We haven't seen legislative text yet, so we don't know what that looks like. But that's something that definitely, I think, in the next few months, we'll start being able to see what that actually could mean to South Carolina.
So, Mr. Secretary, you would say that the inflation that has led to this, we've seen the diminishing buying power, that would be more pandemic-induced rather than, say, federal spending, but the federal spending helped us keep pace
I think
with the inflation.
What I would say is the inflation the inflation was being felt just like seeing in everything else that was going on. The federal money allowed us to keep awarding projects, or states in general to award projects because they had that funds available to absorb that inflationary impact. So I wouldn't say I'm not saying, I don't think there's been a research study to say there was a complete correlation, but it was happening at the same time.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. So talking about the bill in specifics here, there are certainly some things that we believe could help the Department of Transportation accelerate the projects that we have before us. And there are 5 elements that I wanted to, in the legislation, I think that are very important for us. So I'll kind of walk through them. Please interrupt me with any questions as we get into the specifics. As Mr. Owens alluded to, the first big one is it's a priority of the current administration and has been in the books for actually a number of years now, is that similar to what the EPA does with the Department of Environmental Services, the Federal Highway Administration can delegate to the Department of Transportation the ability to manage our own environmental process. So we're still subject to all the same federal rules. We're still subject to do the due diligence that we have to do of coordinating with other agencies, but it would allow us to control our priorities, allow us to ascertain the risk of litigation ourselves, and would allow us to, I believe, expedite projects. And so I would say Florida, Utah, Arizona, states of similar size or similar type of communities to us, have reported to me saving project times of months and years as a result of this. The requirement that would be needed by the General Assembly would be, as Mr. Owens said, we have to waive our right for any decision of the department to go into state court and go immediately into federal court.
Mr. Secretary, let me stop you there for a second. When we say we take over permitting, are we talking even permitting that currently we wait for the Corps of Engineers to approve and provide?
Yes, sir. So
this is a limited type of permitting.
So what this would do is, when we go for a decision, so any project that we do with federal funds has to get a environmental decision, either from categorical exclusion, which is the lowest level, to an environmental impact statement, which is the highest and longest taking time. The Federal Highway Administration controls that process, and so they do the coordination with the Army Corps of Engineers, the Department of Natural Resources, the Environmental Protection Agency, all of those relevant parties. What this would do is remove the federal highway offices here in South Carolina. Actually, because of the reductions at the federal level right now, all of our stuff is actually being done out of Raleigh right now. So we've lost that local presence, but we would coordinate that. We have a pretty good relationship with the Charleston District of the Army Corps of Engineers. So in my book, it actually cuts a middleman out of going through those discussions that we have, but they still control the 404 and the 408 permits at the end of the day. You still have to work through that process, but it
Well,
does
that's too
let us
bad.
work. I'm sorry?
Well, that's too bad.
Yeah. But it still would, I believe, allow us to make those decisions about litigation risk. It would still allow us to make decisions about what's important on the mitigation that might be needed on a project. So it certainly, I think, gives us more control. And then certainly we would, if we ended up in litigation, we would be defended by our own attorney general rather than a junior attorney at the Department of Justice who might have been handed the file a day or two before.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Senator from Florence.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. So if we were to accomplish that NEPA assignment, from a labor utilization and a budgetary standpoint, does it require more FTEs and additional budget?
So, you got to keep in mind what was the staffing level at the federal highways before people left during those deferred resignations. It was about a two-person operation. When we're doing our work today on environmental, we have a robust environmental office at DOT with environmental engineers, naturalists and biologists, archaeologists that are all kind of dealing with all those elements. We have existing liaison relationships with the Army Corps, Department of Environmental Services in terms of having people that are basically dedicated to serve our things. In anticipation that we might be pursuing this, we already have established positions within the department. We reorganized internally so that we could staff up, and they are, pending approval by the General Assembly, have already started working on the forms, the manuals, the documents that would be needed for us to take it over. So there is about a year historically certification process that goes on, but we would be ready to, if approved and following the procedure that's enumerated in the legislation, we would be ready to roll almost immediately and start trying to work on getting ready to take over this.
Okay, it sounds like a solid idea with a lot of upside. Is there any downside, or why haven't we done this or considered this before?
Certainly, there's a we have to make a legal determination that we're willing to allow our decisions to go into federal court. So that's a big decision for the General Assembly to make. So I'll put that out there. I think in years past, we had a pretty good relationship with Federal Highways. We still do, but we don't have the people anymore. I'm literally going to Raleigh for a decision on something. So we're not getting that same level of service, I would say. Things are moving forward. And I think it's the balancing of the litigation risk, that we'll be the ones required to defend ourselves. But what I would say is that we have very few projects that go to litigation today, and I would say that's because of the work our team already does in terms of working and coordinating, being active in coordinating with those interested parties so that we're working through those issues when we come up with the mitigation that might be needed for a project. And that mitigation can be, environmental, wetlands, archaeological. You have to look at that full picture from there.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator from Charleston.
Thank you for being here this morning. You mentioned that highest level of federal review. Can you cite kind of maybe a horror story that you guys have dealt with recently in terms of what that cost and dollars and then a time, just delay of something getting stuck in a federal department and not hearing back for a year or so?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably some of our where we get into litigation are going to be on our most complex and most controversial projects. Certainly there's a desired interstate corridor in the Myrtle Beach area that went through a fairly lengthy litigation from there. Obviously, it's not going to happen right now. I've got another project in the Myrtle Beach area that we're seeing signs of that. But what I would say is on our day-to-day projects, we're in bridge replacements, we're in interstate widenings that are within the existing corridor. It more pops up when you do a new alignment project. And for me, what's important is if I have to do of the three levels of environmental review, environmental assessment is where we have probably more. We do 1 or 2 EIS projects a year. Environmental assessment's the next level. That's in the 20 to 30 range. I believe that actually has the most impact for getting us faster and getting things done. The categorical exclusions, we probably can those are, I wouldn't say rubber stamps, but they're much more routine transactions with us. But we think we can save a few months just by us doing that process.
Thank you.
Hit on NEPA assignment there. Second big piece here would be updating our toll statutes in the state. So we have toll statutes. We only have one active toll road in South Carolina. That is through a private concession agreement up in the Greenville area. The last toll road we had was down in Hilton Head. That toll got lifted back in 2021. One of the things that we need to do or consider is, one, that the tolls are, the statute has some very dated and language just related on the public finance side. And so that's kind of what Mr. Owens referred to earlier, of some conforming and updates. But I'm increasingly getting discussions and interest about the concept of choice lanes, which is adding capacity to the interstate. So the existing lanes that would be there would remain free and full in access and available to folks. But that new capacity, people would have the option to pay the toll to get in the lanes and pay their way out of congestion. Obviously, it's a model that has been, you see now in Orlando area as you're going to Walt Disney World. You see it in Metro Atlanta and a number of places. You see it in the Charlotte area. Our current language prohibits us from adding new capacity with tolls, and so certainly to have that expanded and allowed would be a thing, a very important item for us to do. We've begun studying, and I'll probably share the details of it at the State of the DOT. It's not finished yet, of what it could mean in the Charleston area, which is obviously, I would say, our biggest area for congestion right now. But right now, we are envisioning a $7 billion plus project, all on the back of the state and with our federal funds, to rebuild I-526 between Mount Pleasant and West Ashley and Charleston. We have explored the possibility of a choice lane network on I-26 and 526 in Charleston. What I would say to y'all is that it has the potential to not only reduce travel times for folks willing to pay the toll significantly, it also has the potential to reduce the travel times for people in the free lanes at a rate greater than what we're contemplating with the $7 billion project, and likely at a less, not completely paying for, but less out-of-pocket expense to the state than what we were contemplating with the 526 project. So certainly opportunities, and I'll be sharing that, again, something that we could look at in our most congested regions in the state. So that's the Greenvilles and the Fort Mills, but certainly something on the table, I think, that would also allow us to bring projects that are now well outside in the 10-year plus horizon of our project horizon with what we already have going on.
Senator from Pickens had a question.
Secretary, one question. The language that we're talking about, updating the toll language, and the department's position on that, is there any intent or desire to toll existing roads?
No, sir. So the current language in the statute does allow the General Assembly to declare an existing road to be tolled. I don't see the will to do that, but the language would not allow the department to toll an existing road outside of adding new capacity.
Senator from Charleston.
And I appreciate this being a priority for you guys, and this is for what I would say is more of a statement. I think we all agree no one's a huge fan of necessarily tolling roads. I'm glad that you can't toll existing roads beyond new capacity, but more so for the public, we've got to pay for roads somehow. And, option one is raise the gas tax. We know that's going to be super controversial. Locally in Charleston, we tried to extend the transportation sales tax in 2024. That failed by a pretty wide margin. So now we're kind of, in my view, at step three, is looking at other ways to pay for these projects. So that's something I appreciate and support there, because other options just aren't working. So we've arrived at this one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The kind of along the lines of the tolls, we have some authorities to enter into public-private partnerships with private entities that could design, build, finance, operate, and maintain facilities. There's language in this bill that would give much more explicit authority to the department to enter into those long-term arrangements where you could have a third-party, private party build, operate, finance, and maintain our facilities. Again, I think it's a tool in the toolbox. You have to go into those transactions with your eyes wide open. It is a complex financial and contractual and construction agreement that you enter into. But if we're going to put it on the table, as an option for going forward. We definitely need to have that tool in the toolbox. I believe the language that's been proposed would still include the Joint Bond Review Committee would have the oversight of any agreement that the department would be wanting to pursue on that. And then, from my perspective, it certainly could protect and preserve the state's bonding capacity for other projects. And what we've seen is another state's been able to put some of those maintenance responsibilities on the facilities under a P3 and reallocate those dollars to other parts of the state. So it certainly is an option. It's not the only way to get things done, but it is certainly something that if we want to put it on the table, we're going to have the authorizing language. Fourth item here is procurement updates, and it's really a two-part item here. First part is, and there's the language in the bill incorporates language that's in a bill that's presently in the Finance Committee right now. It passed the House last year at the end of session. We operate under a procurement exemption from the State Procurement Code. Basically, DOT had gotten statutory language on procurement back in the 1950s, long before the State Procurement Code was enacted in the 1980s. So we were basically ahead of things. The exemption as it's written today does not necessarily contemplate what goes on a state roadway from where we are today, from where we were in the 1980s. And so obviously there's a lot of pressure of moving towards adding more and more technology onto our roadways, of adding more signal technology, doing intelligent transportation systems to kind of move things forward. This would certainly give us the ability to deal with those technology purchases under our own authorities. Rest areas are part and parcel of the interstate. They basically operate contained within it, but that goes through a whole separate construction process. And then we're increasingly asked to participate in helping construct transit projects that have elements that are not necessarily envisioned in the code. And so this would give us those authorities and ability to basically take care of what our mission within the state right-of-way and to fully fulfill that without working through two different procurement mechanisms. The second part of within the legislation is adding two new procurement methods to South Carolina than we have right now. Right now, I know there was a lot of questions about contracting yesterday with the commission. For construction projects, we basically procure our projects in two methods. The first one is known as design, bid, build, where we hire a designer. They give us a set of plans. We take that set of plans, we put it out to the market, and the contractors bid on it, and the lowest responsible bidder, lowest bidder wins the job after we've done our due diligence to make sure it's a complete bid. That's the overwhelming majority of our projects in the state. We also do what's known as design build, and it's more of a best value where you ask a team of a designer and a contractor to come together and to propose how they would deliver a project. And so it is both looking at the qualifications and the technical proposal as well as the price. And so major projects we've done, the Scout Interchange project right now is a design build project going very well. The Volvo Interchange down in Charleston. There have been other projects that have not done as well, but we've learned those lessons, but we've done that. So there's two new tech tools that have been proposed here. The first is known as CMGC, Construction Manager General Contractor, and in that arrangement, the department will hire a design engineer to design our project. At the same time, based on qualifications, we would select a contractor to basically be part of that process, so they could give their input as the design is being developed, saying, hey, if you move this 2 feet over here, you can save this. If you do these type of items. At the end of the design, that contractor would then basically get first dibs proposing a price for that proposal. There'd be an independent review of their cost estimate, but they would get that. If we rejected it, we could then bid it out and go from there. So that's CMGC. The other one is known as phased design build, and what you do is you hire the design and contracting team as a single team, and you do it solely on qualifications and their technical experience. and then the department and the design teams negotiate the scope and work to try to manage the risks that are associated with that project. The language that's included here would still have, because of that, and then you would negotiate a price at the end of it. These are tools in other states, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina. That one would be subject to a third-party review verifying that the cost is fair and reasonable to the department, and including the language is that the Joint Bond Review Committee would approve us going into that process before it started. I'll stop there on any questions on procurement, since there was a lot of technical stuff there.
Mr. Secretary, procurement is obviously, as you know, we've talked about a number of times over the past few years, and certainly part of it is way outside of my area of expertise. But the descriptions make sense to me. In other words, we've got to figure out a way, right, to build roads where we need to build roads. I recognize that every part of the state is different. My community, while we certainly have roads that are in poor shape, we need capacity desperately. I recognize that's not the same thing for Marlborough County or Dillon County or even Pickens County. Pickens County has a lot more need to get those bridges fixed. So anything that we can do to help us get to where we need to be, whatever that need is for that local community, and get that road either fixed or constructed as quickly as possible, and recognizing, at least at this point, we have limited resources and limited sources of those resources. How do we best deploy those assets, right? That's the magic soup that we got to figure out the ingredients to. But some of these procurement changes seem to make sense to me, of allowing, as I understand it, almost allowing the contractor and the engineers that are working on the project to say, hey, wait a minute, almost in the middle of a project or early in a project, to say, hey, if you did something differently here, you could still achieve your goal, but it would be significantly less expensive or quicker or both. Is that what we're talking about here ultimately?
The big challenge, particularly on our largest and most complex projects, so the 526s of the world, the malfunction junctions of the world, what you're always going to be dealing with is risk and things popping up. And obviously utility relocation is a big risk on the malfunction junction project. We've had issues with hazardous materials when we were building the port access road. So, those risks that a contractor has to accommodate and deal with. So the concept would be is that as you're working together, you can address those risks that you're seeing come up in a project, because that's ultimately what's driving is there's the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns, to paraphrase Donald Rumsfeld, but you deal with that on every construction project of you open up something and you thought it was fine and it isn't fine, or you find bad soils, you find those challenges. So this would allow that process so that you can have that dialogue before you get under contract to fully kind of vet those issues out. Again, I see the overwhelming majority of our projects are going to stay as bid build and still using traditional design build, but if we had this tool, I think there's going to be a group of projects where the risk profile would say we may want to put this in the toolbox to look at and use it from there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I guess I'm just old-fashioned. I like the design bid build. But in your contracts of late, so many years back, are you having a lot of finger pointing between the designers and the contractors? In the general contracting arena, there's a lot of finger pointing with design bid build. How much of that do you have with road construction?
At the end of the day, we own the plan, so it's at the department and the contractor. We've got to work through that. I would say we have, there was a lot of questions yesterday. This is our standard specifications manual. So this is basically the Bible for construction within the state. So a very detailed document about what a contractor is expected to do, but what the department is also expected to do back and forth. And we just updated this, published it last year in cooperation with the contractors. So we have kind of that defined standard here of what's a contractor responsibility, what's DOT responsibility. There's still going to be disputes that come together, particularly when you find something you weren't anticipating in the field or having those challenges. It's a little squishier, is the best term I can use on design build, because you don't have a complete set of plans when you go into the contractual arrangement. And so we had some real hard lessons learned on I-85. This committee's talked about that a lot, of not how we manage the right-of-way acquisition, how we manage the utility relocation. And so we've applied those lessons learned in our future design build projects. And so we do a lot more upfront work on making sure the right-of-way is in place, making sure that the utility agreements are in place. And we've seen a lot better performance on those contracts, but it's the devil in the details, and you're having to, there's a lot more give and take in those arrangements that we have. And so these other tools I think you still will have give or take, but they do kind of should aim to flesh out some of those issues before you get into construction.
I'm still not sure you made me feel good about the answer to the question.
Yeah.
Appreciate that answer. You do a great job. But again, with design bid build, are you having much finger pointing between I know it's your plan that you had designed, but when that contractor gets out there and he's building it out and there's a problem with the design, there's always 2 or 3 sides to every story, and the answer's in the middle.
And that's where we have our personnel, so our resident construction engineers, who are kind of the folks on the ground. They are empowered to make decisions up to a certain level of saying, hey, the plans are, this wasn't necessarily looking about how we have it, or the survey was off by some point here. So they have that authority. I would say that happens. We try to work through that collaboratively. I would say we have a whole escalation process up to a claim filed by the contractor that has basically an arbitration board on it. I would say very few bid build projects get into that. I would say it's more likely to happen in a design build project where it's a little less, the final product is less defined. So we usually are able to work through it. And again, that may mean a change order that happens. If we said there were 2 feet of rock and there turns out to be 3 feet of rock, well, at that point, that issue's likely on the department to deal with. But if there's a performance issue and they start missing time and it's because they hadn't adequately resourced the job, then that triggers liquidated damages.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, could you talk a little bit about the logic behind going with the lowest bidder on a project? This is going to come across as a little reductionist or simplistic on my end, but I've always heard that sometimes in life you get what you pay for. And so I'm not suggesting that the lowest bidder, is somehow inept. But in my mind, I'm wondering maybe if you went with someone that maybe the bid was a little higher, perhaps that may save the taxpayers money in the long run if they are able to finish the project a little quicker, if you will. So can you just talk a little bit about just the logic behind going with the lowest bidder?
It's a long tradition in governmental procurement in the United States to go down that way. So I would say we're very consistent with every other state in the country. Obviously, we do pre-qualification of our bidders, so that they make sure they have that issue. We do an evaluation process, and there is a process by which we can put a firm into delinquency. And we did that on I-85 with the contractor on that one because of the issues we were having. That basically limits their ability to bid on new projects if they're not performing one of their existing projects. And then we have a ability to debar a contractor. Now, I would say it historically has only been when there's been very serious violations that we've debarred somebody. So we do have that escalation. I think that's where design build, as we've talked about, it does, because it looks at both the proposal and the team behind it as well as the price. And so when you do a design build procurement, you may end up with I would say most of the times we end up with the best price with the best team proposal, but you can end up in a situation that we may award a contract at a slightly higher price than a contract with because of the quality of the technical proposal and the team that's behind it.
Just real quickly, kind of picking up on Senator from Richland's question, is there, do you do analysis? Is there data available that says, low bid winners and their frequency of change orders versus non-low bid orders and their frequency of change orders, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, we do a report to the commission. Basically, we look at the kind of in aggregate, and obviously we do track that of contracts where they are within their contractual timelines. Right now, we track about 85% based on contractual timeline. Might have been there was a utility relocation issue that was beyond the control of the contractor, and so they've been given time, but that 85%, and so there's 15% of our projects that we do put into penalties. And then we also track when we close out whether or not, obviously, there are both positive change orders and negative change orders. So there are times where you increase the value of the contract. There are times you actually decrease the value of the contract. And what I would say is we track anywhere from -2 to +2 on that range. We set our contingencies generally at a minimum of 3% on our projects, more for larger projects. So we recognize that we're operating within that contingency because there are things that do crop up and pop up when we're building a project.
Yeah, thank you. Secretary, I may have misunderstood my chairman over here, but he mentioned Pickens a minute ago, and he said there was no congestion up there.
I didn't say there was no congestion.
I don't want to get in between disputes, but I do have family in Pickens County, and
Well, I
contest this
encourage
congestion.
him. I encourage him to come up there on some Saturdays in the fall and tell me there's no congestion.
Oh, here we go.
You did it now.
But I do have a question about the I-26 west of here going toward Newberry.
Yes, sir.
That project, was that a design build project?
Yes, sir.
And how did it come in budget wise?
So it did ultimately require, there have been change orders that we did. We changed the traffic control on that one. So if y'all recall in the 85 project, there were chutes that were put in where people kind of one lane per lane. Seeing the challenges we had on I-85, we had to do a change order to basically make sure that the traffic control stayed, that you always had 2 lanes of traffic moving or 3 lanes of traffic moving. So I can get that final number, but there were change orders. There was also the utility bill that got passed. We had to make change orders to incorporate City of Columbia water and all of those things that we were then responsible for paying. But we can get you a final dispensation on that one. Okay. And the last thing here on the project delivery tools is municipalities are granted the ability to consent to projects within their boundaries. We've had some scenarios where it has gone for multiple years to get that consent, so this would not remove their authority to do that, but put them on a clock of 180 days. Absent of a decision, it would be considered an approval, but just to keep those type of projects moving forward. I'll move ahead, Mr. Chairman, outside of tools, unless you had any other questions on that.
Okay. Any other questions for Secretary at this time? All right, Mr. Covington wanted to speak to us this morning, or signed up, I think, to speak to us this morning as well. And then Mr. Owens needs to point out a few things. I'd like to knock those out if we could before we adjourn today.
Okay. I'll move quickly on the last 2 items here. Also in the bill, as Mr. Owens alluded to, there is a proposal to adjust EV fees in the state. Right now, an internal combustion car pays about $200 or more per year in gas tax. Our state registration fee for electric vehicles is at $120 every 2 years, so they're basically paying about a third into the maintenance of the system. The bill has language in there that would increase that, as well as establish a charging station fee for those pass-through traffic. You think about the Buc-ee's in Florence. One item I think that'll be discussed here is one of the issues we hear a lot is growth paying for growth. Proposal in here is a congestion mitigation fee of $2,500. per home for new development that would stay within it would be managed by DOT, but stay within the county it was generated. Could pay for improvements like intersection improvements, turn lanes, things like that. So, again, open to ideas and solutions that can deal with that issue without burdening the existing taxpayer with that growth. I'll talk about the budget in the Finance Committee, but obviously a lot of questions on that. And lastly, improving transportation. We have a planning in the state. We have a fragmented system in the state in terms of just the number of agencies having a role in that. The legislation includes a proposal to establish a coordinating council, very similar to what we do in workforce development and economic development, would bring together the state agencies that move the state. That includes us, the Department of Public Safety, DMV, Ports Authority, Palmetto Rail. They would be responsible for doing the statewide multimodal plan, coordinate plans that each one of us has for how we do it to try to make sure we're all aligned, and then would work to make sure that we have a uniform system of regional planning with our metropolitan planning organizations, council of governments. And the last item here I have for y'all, and then I will step away if desired by the committee, is that right now the State Infrastructure Bank has the chairman of the DOT commission on there. That position rotates annually. You heard from many of our commissioners yesterday. These projects can last for 5 or 6 years, and so having the secretary or more permanent representative on that board would make sure that there's continuity in their decisions. And Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, has your department been able to ascertain the percentage of out-of-state drivers that pay the gas tax?
So RFA has done that estimate. It can be about 30 to 40% is being paid by out-of-state drivers. I-95, I know we get a lot of complaints about it, but it is 40 to 50% out-of-state drivers passing through on that facility.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
Good morning.
Fit, just tell us who you are, who you're
Yes,
with, and what we need to know.
Thank you, and I understand you're not taking up amendments today, so I'm going to just be very brief to share some thoughts with you. I'm Michael Covington. I am a contract lobbyist, but one of my clients is the Coastal Conservation League, and as I was saying to the chairman yesterday, if there's ever a legal challenge of a permit under the NEPA process, it's probably going to come from us. But that's a rare thing. It does not happen very often. We have been, and let me tell you just a brief amount about my background. I spent 14 years as the chief lobbyist for the general contractors and was director of the Highway Heavy Division of the General Contractors, Associated General Contractors. And so 14 years as chief lobbyist for the general contractors who do highway work, and I know that Senator Rice remembers very clearly some conversations we had way back with his background in construction. And also after that, I left there and went to work for the Department of Transportation as the Director of Administration. Most of my time there, 13 years, was Director of Administration, and also served as governmental affairs person. So I've got quite a bit of history and knowledge, and I was thinking when Senator Walker was talking about low bid, one thing a lot of people don't understand, and this is off subject a little bit, but I'm going to edify you on something. A lot of people don't understand that highway work on the design bid bill process is based on unit prices. So you will the plans that go out will, let's say, estimate 1,000 feet of 36-inch RCP. Okay, that would be what the engineers estimate in the plans. They get out there and find out, oh, we needed 1,200 feet of 36-inch pipe. So the contractor is paid based on whatever his unit bid was. So that keeps you from having those debates between the designer and the contractor. And again, I know Senator Rice is familiar with what I'm talking about, but I just thought I would throw that in because it spurred my mind to think about it. On NEPA process, the National Environmental Policy Act, we met with the Secretary back in the fall before there was any drafts of legislation and said, look, we agree that this is a good idea. You know, one of the things when the Federal Highway Administration started cutting a number of employees, they only had, I think, one person in the Columbia office handling NEPA. And so then that person was gone, and now, as he said, they have to go to Raleigh. This is just bureaucracy, and there's no need for it. So we totally agree that it's a good idea for DOT to do that. However, we would like to know what the process is going to be, and so we'd like to suggest a couple amendments. I know you're not taking them up today. One amendment would be that the department would be required to develop a manual, and so that everybody will know what the process is for advancing environmental permits in South Carolina. And then the second amendment would be to currently, if we ever have to do a Freedom of Information Act request under the current process, the standard operating procedure for feds is to waive the fees for providing the materials, and we just want to be don't want to mandate it, but would like to have an amendment, and I have it drafted, that would say that when interpreting the public interest for Freedom of Information Act, that the department would lean toward the public interest being in favor of waiving the fees whenever possible. And then the third thing, which is not in writing in my amendment, is that you might want to, I had originally, we had conversations and had originally said maybe there should be a sunset on this, so that if it's not working right, you know. But in thinking about it further, maybe not a sunset, but maybe some sort of review, a mandated review after 4 or 5 years because the memorandum of understanding that DOT will have with the Federal Highway Administration will be will have a 5-year period, and then it'll have to be renewed. So that might be a good time to just look and see, is this thing working the way we anticipated? That's really all I had to say, and I've got language on that. I don't expect any action today, but I appreciate your time.
Thank you, sir.
Any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Covington? All right, thank you. All right, Mr. Owens, what do we need to know before our next meeting?
Thank you, thank you, Chairman. On that note, as far as amendments, just to give you an idea, so far we have proposed amendments by Senator Sutton, by the Trucking Association, by the Coastal Conservation League. I know we'll have some cleanup language from DOT relating to bonding and CTCs, maybe some other things, and I expect some things from the Municipal Association. But I did want to point out several things to you just to expand on a couple of things. The Coordinating Council for Transportation and Mobility, as the Secretary touched on, I don't want to say devolves, but it really does devolve some of the powers of the DOT Commission to that council, including approval of the statewide infrastructure plan. And as I mentioned before, the bill as written removes the requirement that the commission approve DOT's budget. As far as municipalities and delaying projects that DOT is working on within the municipality, the bill also provides that DOT may have cost recovery from a municipality. The Secretary mentioned the development mitigation fee, the congestion fee, $2,500 for single-family developments, $1,500 for residential developments, and then there are also fees for commercial developments. Relating to turnpike bonds and the entities that may lawfully invest in them, it adds the State Retirement Investment Commission. Relating to alternative fuels, it increases, as the Secretary touched on, EVs increase from $120 to $400 biannually. Hybrid fees would increase from $60 to $20 biannually. And then there's a formula for EV and hybrid trucks weighing 11,000 or more, 11,001 or more pounds. Most commercial 18-wheelers would be exempt because they pay alternate taxes. Almost through here. Relating to the state procurement code, it would also exempt DOT's purchase and management of information technology. Relating to a user fee per kilowatt hour, it provides a 4.5 cent per kilowatt hour user fee for public charging stations that would go to the State Highway Fund. That would be indexed. And finally, it also provides an increase to the distribution formula of the gasoline user fee among user tax, that among counties, I should say. That is the per gallon formula that goes to county CTCs, and also establishes procedures or modifies procedures for using those C-Fund dollars. So thank you, Chairman.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Owens. Members, as you can see, there's a lot in this bill. And why my initial comments early on, I'd like to take it slow, be methodical with it, do a lot of work here in the subcommittee so that we're not redoing that work, although we will always redo that work, right, at some point at the committee and certainly on the floor. But as much that we can get hashed out here, I would appreciate. So, generally speaking, the Secretary laid out kind of the major components of the bill. Be thinking about those. Share your ideas in the meantime about your thoughts on kind of the larger general concepts. And then my intention would be at our next meeting, which I hope to get scheduled for next week, is to start going through the bill section by section and hear from those constituencies out there that want to speak to those individual sections and offer up recommended language. Anybody opposed to that process? Very good. Anything else today?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
the documents that are in this book, do we need to leave them, or can we take them?
Take the inserts and leave the binders, if you will. All right, if there's nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. So moved. Second. And a second. We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.